begin, I would like to acknowledge the Bejical people that are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders both past and present, and to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Welcome. Tonight we're here to celebrate Sienna Brown's debut novel, Master of My Fate. This is one that's based on a true story. It's a novel about William Buchanan, who was... the book is a story about William Buchanan on his journey to become his own master, from slavery in Jamaica through to eventual freedom in colonial New South Wales. Sienna is a lifelong storyteller and daughter of Jamaican parents. Sienna has worked in various roles at Sydney Living Museum, which is where she was first captivated by William's story and the way it intersected with her own cultural background. Sienna is also a professional film editor and documentary director by trade, and also the owner of Pine Street Films as producer, director and writer, and also currently working on your second novel.
That's
correct.
Yes.
And you also dabbled in events
and
programs.
We work on events together.
Right.
Yes.
How am I going? I kind of put it in here, but I need to fact check that this is where you two met, at Sydney Living Museum.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that leads me nicely into Jackie Goulding. Your History, a Shared Table exhibition, which was shortlisted in the 2013 New South Wales Premier Awards for the multimedia area. She is also the author of the New South Wales Heritage Award-winning book, Eat Your History, Stories and Recipes from Australian Kitchens.
Available in this good bookshop.
Of course. I think you were saying with that book that it was somewhere in the 1800s that there wasn't really any format of recipes for Australian style of eating, is that correct?
The first Australian cookbook was published, or was written by an Australian, was 1864.
1864, yeah.
Cool. Struggled along somehow. English cookbook.
So, just before we begin, just make sure your phones are on silent. There will be a chance for you to ask questions at the end of the talk. We're not using microphones tonight, we're keeping it nice and intimate, so if you're sitting up the back, just make sure you stand and let your voice boom. I'm going to stop talking and let's get on with what we came for. Let's make him welcome.
Thank you. So, over to Jackie. First of all, Emily's got an amazing delivery, which I may not be able to meet, but if you're at the back or we can't hear or we start mumbling, just, wait. Because the idea of tonight is an in-conversation. We're not here to lecture you. We are in a university, but this is not a lecture. So it's really an opportunity to explore Sienna's work. Through, so you really get a sense of the Sienna's voice, but also the voice of the characters in the book, and talk about the various aspects that the book brings up. So perhaps first of all, has anyone here already read the book? One? Good. Okay. Yay. So Emily sort of captured, I guess, very briefly what the book is about in her introduction, but perhaps we should get Sienna to just kind of give us a little gist of the gist. Yes, a nutshell.
A nutshell. 40,000 slaves were involved in that. And it was sort of the last final really big rebellion before the abolition of slavery came about. So he was one of the rebels actually involved in that. He then got convicted, and instead of being hung, what was really strange is that he ended up getting transported as a convict to the colony of New South Wales in 1836. So that's a pretty big journey. And he arrived here, he went to Hyde Park Barracks, which is where Jackie and I met, so there's a lot of synchronicity here. And within 2 months, he and this guy called James Smith, another Jamaican, had actually escaped, of course. You know, got out, figured out this is too much for me, and he escaped. And he was raiding properties up and down Old South, what's now known as Old Southhead Road. So he was very much part of this landscape. Eventually he does get captured, and then we have the ending of the book, which I won't necessarily go into. I'm probably giving it all away now. Yeah, no spoilers.
But that's it. He's captured extraordinarily, almost like a sort of golden triangle, in that he's been part of the slavery system.
Yes.
Part of that imperial slavery system. So I think many of us think of, when we think of enslaved people, we automatically think of America because it's so present in the histories that we're taught at school and what have you. So it's really interesting, I think, for a lot of readers to see a different location and that very English connection.
Definitely the British Empire.
British Empire.
Yeah.
Then he comes to Sydney as a convict, so notoriety here. That's, what do they say? Australian royalty if you're related to a convict.
Nowadays.
Nowadays. For a long
I don't
time.
think. Yeah.
For a long time.
Yes.
So there's definitely a theme here of displacement as well, and being caught up in a system that you have no say in your fate. But I think maybe what is extraordinary, because this is a fictional narrative, but what is really important is those elements of William's life are not fiction.
They're definitely not fiction.
So that brings us to the Hyde Park Barracks, where Sienna and I met when Sienna was working there. And are you familiar with Hyde Park Barracks in Sydney? It's at the top of Macquarie Street, just opposite St James Station and the St James end of Hyde Park, opposite St James Church actually and St Mary's. In that top end, where Macquarie Street stops.
Yeah, and you probably walked past there a million times, like I did before I started.
In 1819, and it really was the sort of heartbeat of the convict system from 1819 through to the 1840s, and many people like William and not like William passed through those gates, and the whole convict system had a huge impact on not just Sydney but the whole of the colonising of New South Wales, the expansion over the mountains, that sort of intrusion or invasion, you might like to say, into Aboriginal territory. All that was conducted through the barracks as being sort of the hub, if you like, of the convict system. So actually the barracks is closed at the moment. It's opening in December. It's for its 200th anniversary. It's having a whole revamp of how it tells those convict stories, but also its life. He's not just a character
He's a real person.
He was a real person in our history.
That I've kind of spent my last 8, 10 years with. Researching, writing. At some point I'd actually fallen in love with William. It was very strange having a relationship with someone 180 years in the past. But it was kind of an interesting one. I did keep thinking, who is this man? You know, because for his spirit to have gone through the ages, to have actually reached out to me, and there was a very specific point, I think,
opportunity for us to hear that voice speaking through you for the first of our little reading.
Yes. So this actually starts at the end. This first, what we call the prologue, is actually the end, pretty near the end of the book. And so you're looking at the colony of New South Wales, 1851, and then after that we jump back into the past and start right at the beginning. So I'm going to take my glasses off so I can actually see.
The rest of us have to put them on.
But I can't see out there, so you know. I wake with a start, been dreaming but a light that shine bright, strong, hot, even though all round is a cool, shadowy darkness. A light that called to me, softly, softly, if only I can reach it, touch it, pull it out of the darkness and keep it safe. I reach out for that light as if still in a dream, but it starts to fade, and I wake to a body that feels heavy, heavy as lead. To moan, to dream the same dream, a dream about the hot, strong light of my childhood. I sense it gathering all around me, and it feels so good. Where is it? Where is the place I've been dreaming of? A place in a memory from a long forgotten past that up till now must be stayed hidden. A memory that live on still, faded, the color drained right out of it. I need that light, the dreaming light, to see the power of color memory deserve. The door creak open, footsteps on the wooden floor, voices just out of reach. He's awake, a woman's voice said. So that's the beginning.
And as you said, you've begun
At the
at
end.
the end.
Yes.
So perhaps again another question for the audience. Is anybody here a writer or would-be writer or curious about the whole writing process? Because we can go into that whole, you're telling a man's life story.
Absolutely. And
which
he's
is-
sick here at the beginning.
Yes. So
At the end of the novel, he's quite sick, but he's being looked after. And and he's dreaming. He's dreaming about his childhood.
so there must have been a decision that you made somewhere along.
Very as a 5-year-old, that he needs something. He's chattel, essentially. And so the beginning of the book starts with kindness. And I think, and then we come back to it at the end. And this was William's voice. This was the first time I heard his voice. He said these words to me. So it felt important to start that way.
So when you say that was the first time he spoke to you, was that you come across this chap in the barracks, a list of what,
A list of
thousands of names,
Absolutely.
40,000 names, something
Yeah.
like that. Came out of that list.
Came out of the list, yeah.
Obviously, because of your own Jamaican heritage, he would stand out. But
That's
there were
right.
several Jamaicans.
Several,
well,
yeah. And
dozens
in fact,
actually.
there were 700 when we did the research.
Wow.
There were 700 non-Europeans arrived
Yes.
through that period. And the year that William arrived, in 1836, there were 31 West Indians on 2 convict ships. You never hear about that, right? But they were actually, they arrived and they were here. William was one of them.
The local Sydney colonial historian, it's really interesting, I think, because we sort of think about Anglo-Celtic heritage, and that most of the convicts were either English, Irish, Scottish,
Welsh.
yes,
Yeah.
you know, very, very sort of, you know, very Anglo-Celtic. So that idea that Sydney itself was actually not just at the barracks, but Sydney's streets, its life, its energy, was
Social standard, definitely.
It also brings to my mind, because I guess, you know, part of my job and the work you were doing at the barracks and at Sydney Living Museums is to bring life from 200, 150 years ago to life for modern people, for our visitors, or for modern Australians or visitors to Australia. So, you know, you've made films, and now an author, so very much the natural storyteller.
Mm.
So what was, I guess, had you decided you wanted to write a book and
discovered these other more convicts, and then I was going to do sort of a very academic book and write about it very objectively and stuff like that, and then gradually it moved into William's story, first person talking about it, and really the whole point about that was to hopefully put the reader into the person's shoes so that when you're reading it, and that's the response. William's 10, and Calla is the woman he talks about here, and Calla's an old Obeah woman that he meets pretty early on, who decides to take him on and mentor him. Stella's his mum, who you'll see through the book. He and William have a very thorny relationship, because mum's dealing with a lot. The Massa is her partner, and William is the Massa's son, and along with 3 other siblings. Places, so I turn invisible, unseen, while others move round me. Know how to listen in at keyholes, sneak a look in windows, round half-closed doors, peek through a hole in the floorboards from underneath the great house. Look and listen in on all manner of goings-on, not seeing that sometimes part of me gone missing, and I get lost in a silence that is harder and harder to come out from. But it's a silence I cling to, make me feel safe. Since most times nobody noticed me, especially when Sammy, my younger brother, hovering around, because soon enough Sammy turned favorite, makes Stella always patting and cooing to him. And when old Phoebe get too old to work, Stella turned head house slave, no longer just cleaning woman. She abandoned me, unrudded me from her apron strings. Now every morning I do the same thing. when the sun starts to colour up the sky, I set out
Yes. Very, very moving, and I think it's because you're not just describing what a place looks like. You're describing what that place is to this boy.
And he's found his hidey holes.
And he's finding, well, he's, first of all, just in that, we're realising he's had to come to understand that he is a slave and what that means and how that influences your behaviour, how you have to act. He's seen that passed on from his elders, because most children just, the world centres around them, and he's realising that there are ways that you have to play this game.
You have to play the game.
And he's an actor in this game as well. And yet, in his local environment, he's finding these little sanctuaries and these places where that he's a child only. So it's very poignant. I think you've done that quite nicely.
Thanks, Jackie. And personal.
Well, there you go. Yes,
Well, the sun, I don't know about anybody else, but if you're born in the tropics, I tell you, all I have to do is sit out in the sun for about 30 minutes and that's it, I'm cured. And people, sort of everyone's afraid of the sun and being out there and stuff, but also, looking at the people in the audience at the moment, we've got a lot of people who come from somewhere else. And I don't know how you feel about that, but this idea of belonging, which country does one belong to? This is my third country that I've lived in. And I tell you what, it's been very difficult to actually figure out where does one belong. And it's, where as William had to at some point figure out, where do I belong, how do I fit in, and what does that really mean, and where is home, and I've had to figure out that home is in my heart, and the land that I'm living in is really important, but it's It's a community of people. It's the spirit of people. That's the home, really. I've sort of digressed and gone off somewhere else, but yeah, that's sort of what it's all about, really. Yeah.
But it also brings in, you introduce us to colour, and you mentioned Stella. But in those convict records, you didn't just find William. When you dug deeper, you also found his family. So Stella is not a fictional character. She may have been fictionalised in the story, but William, the records show that he had his mother Stella, his siblings.
Yeah, that's right.
And who play a very important role. So the book isn't just a sort of a monologue from William.
Yeah, you're very.
We have other characters as well.
We do, and that's a nice segue into talking about the first time I saw a slave register, which totally freaked me out. I'd never seen one. You would think, oh yeah, every Jamaican may have seen that, but no, not at all. Has every Australian seen a convict record? Probably not. So, when I saw that, and it's literally just a journal with lots of names, created their lives on a certain level, but then I guess as a writer you do. I don't know what they were really like. So one is a success, one isn't, one survives the system, one doesn't. So I did sort of appropriate them a little bit, but I still feel I'm honouring them. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's the nature of historical fiction. There seem to be two types of historical narratives. You can be the really dry, let's just stick to the facts.
Yes.
Historical record. You can be you can write historical fiction, which is where you base a place, a time, perhaps characters, and totally fictionalise their story.
Yeah.
And then you also have another genre, which to me I find it hard to work out which is what they call speculative history, which is based on fact. But, if you've only got the dry, hard record, if you want to tell a story, you have to fill in the gaps. So there's a speculation there. So I think what you've done is married
the two together.
But at no time are you saying this is a history. You're saying it is a historical story.
Yeah. They become archetypes, and they become human archetypes rather than slave archetypes or black archetypes or white archetypes. They actually become human archetypes that experience all the range of emotions that we all experience, hopefully anyway. That's the way it comes across, So, but yeah, look, it's been a fascinating journey, and there have been many nights of weeping, which I think all creative people at some point go through anyway. When you go deep into something, that's what happens. But yeah.
Well, particularly, ostensibly the book is about William, but because you have Carla, who's a sort of, you have
time, and some of my Jamaican guests might know about that. You know, it was a very interesting society, Creole society, because there were enslaved people, there were people who were free and of various color, and they themselves sometimes had slaves. So you had a very different, I think, to the African American situation there.
Yeah, which again we're introduced to people living those lives.
Living those lives.
Which I think, certainly for many Australian readers might, well, first of all, wouldn't have thought of before. They might be surprised to think of this sort of patchwork of society, and as you said, it's about class. You don't
Very
really
much
quite
so.
know where you're going to land.
Yeah.
And it's not something you can just tell by the colour of your skin. It's your circumstances.
It's definitely circumstance.
And you also talk about the urban parts of Jamaica, because William has grown up on a plantation. It's very kind of rural, I suppose, and it's its own little village like microcosm, I suppose, in itself. And then you take him into some of the bigger towns, and the contrast for him
is huge.
Illustrating not just a community, but this place and this society. It's hard to tell the story without.
I know, we're trying not to give away the spoilers. There's so many, and there's so many dramatic moments. We're trying not to, but this next little passage is actually, I've really jumped ahead now, and we just thought we'd give a slightly different. We've seen William on the plantation, and little slave William. Now what's happened is that he's arrived as a convict, and he's escaped, and he's now a bushranger, and he's escaped with James Smith. So this little bit is about that. And by the way, that is factual. I saw all of the newspaper. It came from William's life. There was at least 3 newspaper articles around it, and they even reference the Maroons in Jamaica within the article, which I thought was really interesting. So there's obviously lots of connections there.
So for those that don't know,
yes,
the Maroons in Jamaica were part of the uprising and
No, the Maroons were a separate, you wouldn't call them race, but the Maroons were there first, and they actually ended up battling the British.
Okay.
And they were runaway slaves. And there's a very famous we've been traveling through the bush for what seemed like a week, but must be only a few days. We keep ourselves hidden, taking turns to watch, making sure we're not heard, not seen. Mid-afternoon, we stumble upon a broken down hut covered in cobwebs, overgrown with vines and weeds. We watch for a few hours before we decide it's safe to enter. The door is stuck, so we have to push, heave to get it open. Inside, everything is old and rotten. Look like the people who lived there must have left in a hurry, and no one else seen the inside of it. Not much in the way of supplies. We collect wood, light a fire, cook a bird we knock down with a stone, sleep indoors for the first time since we escaped, stay another night before we keep on moving. One evening, as the last lingering rays settling in, the bush turning a soft yellow, the smell of fire, of food start drifting towards us. We're so hungry we take a chance, sneak up as close as we can, surprised to see a family of natives made camp. A man, woman, small child, and old man sitting around the fire. A couple of sparrows lay beside them. Behind is a shelter, 2 animal skins stretched across the low branches of a tree. James decided to show himself. He stand up, move slowly, waiting, hoping they're not going to kill him. When nothing happens, I stand up, move closer next to James. We spend a good deal of time just staring at each other. Our skins, raggedy clothes, raggedy hair, us eyeing what looked like one of the native animals with a long tail roasting in the fire. James rubbed his stomach, put his fingers to his mouth as though eating. The family look at the old man, then look back at us. He must be the one in charge. We have nothing to share except a few tubers we dug up that morning, and James laid them on the ground. Finally, the old man nodded, waved at us to come over. It is wondrous to taste the meat, half raw, half burnt, juices running down our faces. Only the man tries to speak to us, a few words of broken English. But mostly we just sit and eat, listening as they speak in a tongue that is totally unknown to us. Finally, we fall asleep, keeping our few precious things hidden beneath us. In the morning, the sound of a native bird cackling in the dawn light wakes us. We are alone. The family must have moved on in the night.
So it brings us firmly back to Sydney, doesn't it? A creature with a long tail and a fire. And again, the Bidjigal people, we're probably in an area.
They wouldn't have got that far. They're heading up to the north. They're heading up to
Awabakal perhaps, or people north of the harbour. But again, it's that sense that we're on someone else's land, and that these people are not here by choice, and yet, yes, that tension, and yet that understanding.
On the Hyde Park Barracks website, that Indigenous people, it was a normal thing to see them within the colony. It wasn't, yes, I know we've got frontier wars, but within Sydney itself, I think I just said something about Market and King Street was where they would gather every morning of a morning and sit there to sell their wares, and engage with the rest of the colony. This was eventually, obviously, things changed and it became really horrific. But there was a period of time at some point where I think there's a Hyde Park Barracks picture of where the barracks is, and there's an Indigenous family walking through, because those were their tracks that they were going. So I don't know. I really was torn a lot about that. I didn't know how to deal with it, actually.
Well, I think you would be very remiss to depict people as bushrangers in the 1830s and not be exposed to or who explains how integral Aboriginal people were in the economy of Sydney. So they were fishing, they were taking people, they were trackers, they were escorting people, We know for the crossing of the mountains a little bit earlier in the 1830s, but they helped Blaxland, our famous trio, Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson. They had Aboriginal trackers helping to guide them. So there's a lot of hidden activity, and it's only been hidden by historians or by people writing about it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. There's no stolen generation.
So
that's right. Didn't happen, did it? Sorry.
Yeah. And yet, reading a story.
That's in there.
We have a whole generation, generations and generations that were not stolen, they were sold. So I think, all of us in any colonised society, I think we have uncomfortable truths, and whether that's brought to the surface by novels or by hard, dry historical accounts or whatever. They do say that more people learn about history through fictional narratives. Because it captures our imagination, it opens up a world for us that we might not otherwise. Then if you want to probe deeper, you can go to look at the history books. But,
and hopefully people will. Can I take a photograph of everybody? Well, because I know, I'm sitting there going, I can't believe all these faces.
And we do a selfie.
Yeah, do a selfie.
Oh no, I hate selfies.
Oh.
Yeah, well, and does anybody mind if I post?
No, post it.
Post away, because, this is unbelievable.
Stand up.
Great.
Stand up.
Yeah. And then what we'll probably do
we'll do some questions.
Yeah.
Get a selfie.
Take a selfie. This is great. I haven't got it.
I've got really short arms, I can't do a selfie.
You have a photographer.
Yeah. Yes. That would be great, because it's such a fantastic audience. And
so do people have questions for Sienna? And speak up so the room can hear.
Don't worry about that.
Okay.
Hi, Sienna.
Hi.
I was wondering about the language that you chose.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a hybrid between Patois and proper English.
Started to find that there was a pattern and that there was a system.
Yes.
And that the way that you put a plural into a sentence is not just
Wasn't
putting
a
an S at
mistake.
the end of a word.
Yes.
And so yes, I struggled with that, but I think it gave a voice to the book that other books don't have. And
yeah, look, well, I've had various different responses. Some people just fall into it right away, and they just have surrendered, and it's great, and they love that aspect. And then some people have texted it.
I did love it.
Yes, eventually you have to work
this is
at
going
it.
on too.
But even for me as a writer, it was really, really difficult. right? Because you want to, especially for your first novel, you want it to be beautiful English, and you want to prove that you are a master of the English language, right? Because that's what writing is sort of about. But that took 2 years, okay, of stripping it back, looking at it, which words are going to be patois, which words aren't. I used the Jamaican dictionary a lot. I also made sure that every single word I used was from the 1800s as well, so I put that pressure on the language as well. So it simplified it. And then it creates an emotion in people.
Can I also mention something? When you said in the about when you met the family and they were cooking kangaroo and then they left and stuff like that, what was really poignant about that scenario, that situation was, you know how you said you didn't want to put the Indigenous people and to do that. It was actually, I haven't even read the book, but it was very tasteful because very much when there's people of colour, it's like I see you, you see me, and we sort of, everybody's taking care of their own backyard and all of that sort of stuff. So that was very tastefully done with giving respect to them, but also showing like, you know, the ranger, that role. A lot of people don't look at the Australian history as having other minorities and all of that, like Chinese people were in the gold rush, all of that stuff. So that whole story and the way you've done it is pretty good to give everyone in a short bit their
Everyone gets a little piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Can I just add on from that, from the early days too, it was like, he was different to first people here.
Yes.
So what people would say here, he's like us, but they're different kind. You know, they're black, but they're different from us.
Yeah.
And I think when people write, we're so used to an Anglo or Caucasian perspective. It might be English, but what is English? There's so many different, you know, Aussie English, American English, English, you know, New Zealand English. But when it comes from a person of colour, the words are, I don't know, are more colourful. It's more colourful rather than this formal way of, and it changes the whole, to me it changes the whole story. So this book to me would be more like a film. I can see, You know,
Yeah.
you can see the pictures. You read the words, but you see the pictures.
That's good.
And that's
Yeah.
that's what I see when it comes from, you know, I've read other people of colour, and it's like, wow, you know, I really see it, and I
I
can.
think speaking from the heart. Well,
Yeah.
everyone speaks from the heart, but it's a different.
But it's a different heart. It's a different heart, because the stuff that we hear is hidden. This other history is our history is hidden.
You know, it's a white man's history, and then there's the other history. But it's actually been intertwined and entangled for.
Well, in some senses, but it gets twisted around to a white perspective rather than a black
because
perspective.
that's the dominant community. That's right. So this sort of flips it really well to see it from another perspective, and through voice is really strong.
Yeah,
part
and
of
it's
that.
definitely written from. I worked very strongly in not writing from the master's perspective. They're in there, but we don't really hear that much from.
Grew up on a farm, you know, and not knowing that there was any difference. Yeah, we knew we were coloured, but
Right.
it wasn't until you got older
Yeah.
then you started to realise because your parents couldn't do anything.
I think it's different too. I mean, it's an interesting point because I think when you're born in Jamaica and you are born into a country of colour, I think that's very different than being born here.
In a country
You know,
like, yeah.
a country that's non-colour. And I think in a strange, interesting way, I think I have really benefited from that because I have, I don't know how to describe it. You've got a different sense of who you are. You know, you've got a black prime minister. People who rule the country are black. You're surrounded by colour. So that's very different. And having then now lived in a country where that's not the case, you know, you really feel
Australia is white.
Yeah.
You know, it's just great to see people in the shops black. You know, the women in the jewellery shops, they're black and they're dressed up. Or go to the bank and they're all black. And
But it wasn't always like that.
Huh?
It
Pardon?
wasn't always like
No,
that.
but I'm just saying in the different countries.
Yeah, no, because
When you're blackness.
I saw my own country
Yeah.
that I left during apartheid. I saw my own country the way you saw it when you saw it for the first time, because that wasn't my reality when I left. So I can understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Wow, you know, customs officials black. Wow, they couldn't do that job before.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean,
I
still
could
felt the-
resonate with
yeah.
what you're saying.
I felt the
But-
undercurrent there,
yeah.
like I got really mad in South Africa because I could feel it all. But you know, going to Vanuatu was just no. But it's just when you're not used to being growing
before I think I realized that it was going to be a book, you know. And I did this journey from the bottom, from Black River, all the way up to Montego Bay, I think at some point, and that was a pretty amazing journey. And I think I fell asleep in the car. It was so hot and so windy, and you know, you're surrounded by this green, and it was amazing. And I think what was happening, stuff was going on, other stuff was going on, while I was having that little snooze. You know, I was sort of taking it in, and then I opened my eyes, and you'd come around the bend, and you'd see these beautiful little church sitting on the hill, and people walking down the hill, and it was, you know, I think I absorbed all that, basically.
Yeah, can I ask you, how old were you when you left Jamaica
I was 12,
at first?
yeah. So I still, you know, I had the taste. I wasn't just a baby.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It was a little one.
yeah. So enough. And you keep that. I mean, you know, my family's Jamaican, so you've got that. But having lived in 2 other countries, it's, you know, I'm a hybrid now. Mum keeps reminding me of that, you know, because I was, during the process, I was agonizing about William and poor William and all the things he had to go through, and she said, stop with all of that. Williams is stronger than you can imagine. Williams has achieved transformation, you know, from a Buddhist perspective. He has transformed his spirit, he has moved on, he's in a book, he's being talked about, so that has happened for him. And I was in Hyper Barracks. We were, Gary is the curator there, and when I was a guide, and there are these beautiful white pipes, clay pipes, on the 2nd floor in the archival area, and he was allowing us to clean them, and of course, you know, that's a really big deal. Only curators touch the artifacts.
Conservative cleaning.
Yes, but so a guide, we were actually allowed to touch them. And we were cleaning, and he was handing them to me, and I was putting them on this beautiful black velvet thing, and they were being cleaned and stuff. And he was standing right here, and this wave my history. I've forgotten the words because they were really beautiful.
Mm.
You know, this is me. I don't want them to get you. I'm waiting. I'm here.
Mm.
So I was writing this, and that I think was him. And the other so it's all him,
Yeah.
really, you know. And I'm just I'm just the tool,
Yeah.
whatever. And the other thing that he was very strong about was that because you know, you're taking class and you have to talk about motivation and what does your character want and you know, what does it mean and all of that. And I kept asking William, what do you want? Is it, you know, freedom, liberty, struggle, fighting, all of that stuff? And he came back to me and said, I want to be the master. And I said, what do you mean? You want to be the slave owner? He said, no, I want to be my own master. And I said, so what do you want? And he said, I want my own land. I just want a little plot of land, so I do my own thing. He was really clear about that, and I got that. So,
Fabulous.
yeah. And, you know, so I gave that to him. So he
Powerful.
voiced it.
Very intimate relationship.
It sort of was. Maybe that's why I didn't end up in a relationship during that period. He was the and he did ancestry DNA and stuff, and he realized he was Jamaican. He had a Jamaican slave in his background. So that got triggered. You know, a few people have gotten in touch and said that they've discovered they have plantation owners, slave owners, and that's freaked them out completely, white Australians. So, you know, that's been, but yeah, so I've traced, he has kept silent. He has not, after he got his conditional pardon, that's it. He's disappeared from them. I can't find him anywhere. So I don't know what's happened to him. All I hope is he fell in love, had children, you know.
And their children and their children are passing us on the street.
That's right.
Yeah.
Going, they're in this room somewhere, you know. Yeah, there's not, but mind you, see, in those days, I mean, the only reason why I was able to trace all that was because he was a convict, you see, and the British kept great records.
Oh, yeah.
There were all the indents, everything got written out. Then he happened to be a bushranger and happened to be in the newspaper, so that's why I was able to track him. And as soon as he became, you know, kept his head down and stopped doing things like that, then...
And Australia actually gave a lot of people a lot of opportunities that they might not have had elsewhere. If he had gone back to Jamaica, the slavery system had been unravelled, but what would he be going back to? He probably wouldn't have been granted land or, you know, been able to work for land the way he could.
That's 1848.
1848.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he went to Goulburn. So the assumption is that if your ticket of leave is what allows you as a convict to leave the barracks, and you're given permission, like a permission slip in Africa, in South Africa, to work elsewhere. So from there, who knows?
Gold rush or
No, I think if you go Queensland way,
He might have gone to
I
the
got
north
that. He worked
because
in the
people in
sugars.
North Queensland, there are a mixture of, and you know, people only just found out, maybe not now, but like 50 years ago, 20,
Yes.
that they've had Jamaican blood. And when you look at bodies shapes, you know, you've got the PNG look, you've got the
Yes.
one top look, you have the Pacific Island look, but then there's the African look or the Jamaican look on the body shape, you know, and it's yeah. So if you go there, because I know.
Not all the same.
Yeah, and I know with the R&R days, you know, a lot of black men moved from the cities and went into the countries and went to North
Yeah.
Queensland, you know, where, as we say, the further north you go, the blacker it gets. So people, a lot of black people would have felt more comfortable.
Yeah, you're
Because
right.
they're
I
around
haven't
there.
even looked at Queensland.
And warmer.
And
Well,
warmer.
the same
Well,
environment.
it's just like
Yes.
Jamaica.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. So when you're feeling more comfortable, you know, when you go north, as we say, America has the deep south, we have the deep north.
How old was he in 1848?
48.
48.
Okay,
1800, so he was born in 1800.
okay.
So
He'd have
maybe
been
that's-
tired
Yeah.
now. I mean, after all that, that's what I
Yeah.
keep thinking. He wouldn't have lasted much longer. I bet he did. Like, you know.
Some people stick to their 90s.
That's right. So maybe he did, but yeah, he would have been tired.
Then the White Australia policy kicks in, so
Yeah. I mean, they
That's
had.
important.
He might have kids, because if people start reading this book, it might. More and more that we hear,
Yeah.
they will come out with their blackness, you know.
There's a throwback. There's always throwback.
There is always.
There's always throwback.
Yeah.
There's throwback even till today. There's throwback.
Oh, there is.
Yeah.
I got some research today, 1888 in the Torres Strait, they're 3% Africans
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
as a part of 10%
Well, they would have
South.
jumped
For
ship.
you,
Yeah.
For, no, sorry, in the Torres Strait, because
Okay.
in relation to South Sea Islander history,
right.
3% Africans were working as a part of those.
But you had the British Evangelical Society taking Jamaicans over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're making it even cooler.
Yeah.
Yo, just to go.
Perhaps before, I don't know if we wind up, it's 8 o'clock, but if anyone has a pen, Sienna might tell us her punch recipe.
Oh, that's right, the punch
Few people
recipe.
asked.
People did ask.
Did everybody try the punch?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
beautiful.
There's a little bit more
If you
there.
didn't have any, there's a little bit left.
Yeah, there is.
Is that pink Bacardi?
No,
Oh.
I put it in the bottle.
Oh, okay.
I thought that should.
It's good.
No, that's to be drunk. So, yeah, no, it's 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, and 4 of weak.
Nice.
So it's really.
You know, sugar, the rum is a byproduct of the sugar industry, and you know we have our rum hospital here in which is the Mint building next to
That's
the
right.
next to Hyde Park Barracks, and so much of that.
Well,
you know,
rum
before
was
there was a
wages.
currency,
Yeah, rum was wages.
before there was a
People-
currency, rum was a thing. So even if people aren't aware of the human presence, the day-to-day presence of Jamaican enslaved people, certainly the commercial trade and the sugar and the beautiful line you talked about, you know, gosh, you know, when you think about, you know, all of this pain, all of this effort, all of this suffering is so people can put a bit of sugar in their tea. It really brings us down to the